I was still wiping my hands on my apron when Dad closed the door and said, "We need to talk." His voice wasn't angry. That was worse. 10 minutes earlier, he'd found my sister barefoot in my bedroom, wearing my robe, my husband's guilt still breathing on her skin. No one screamed. No one defended me. They all just looked at me like I was the problem for standing there, shaking, humiliated inside my own house. That's when something in me went quiet. Calculating. Cold. Because if my family thought I'd beg or break, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're listening from, because women everywhere deserve to know how this ends. The living room felt smaller than it ever had, like the walls had leaned in overnight to watch me be erased. Dad closed the door carefully, deliberately, the way he did when he didn't want neighbors to hear. That sound, the soft click of the lock, landed harder than a slap. My sister was already on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in one of Mom's old blankets even though the heat was on. My husband stood near the window, back half turned, staring at the street as if there was an escape route hidden between parked cars. No one looked at me when I stepped forward. I was still wearing my apron, flour dusted across my hands, because 10 minutes earlier I'd been cooking dinner in my own house, unaware that betrayal was breathing upstairs. Dad cleared his throat and said, "We need to talk," in that low, careful voice he used when he'd already decided the outcome. My stomach dropped, not because I didn't know why, but because I suddenly understood that this conversation wasn't for me. It was about me. He didn't ask what I'd seen. He didn't ask how long it had been going on. He didn't ask if I was okay. He talked about stress. About mistakes. About how my sister had been going through a lot and how my husband was confused. Those words floated through the room like polite smoke, choking me without ever touching the fire underneath. My sister let out a small sob, perfectly timed, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking just enough to look fragile. I waited for someone to turn to me, to acknowledge the humiliation crawling under my skin, the family betrayal unfolding in real time, but no one did. Dad's eyes slid past me as if I were furniture. I felt 12 years old again, standing in the same room, being told to be the bigger person while my sister was protected from consequences. The pattern was so familiar it hurt more than the discovery itself. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded wrong to my own ears, thin and careful. I asked one question, just one. How long? The room went still, and for a brief second I thought I'd cracked something open. Then Dad answered instead of him. "That's not helpful right now," he said, gently, firmly, as if explaining something to a child. That was the moment humiliation settled fully into my bones. They weren't denying it. They were minimizing it. Reframing it as a disruption to family peace rather than the emotional abuse it was. My husband shifted his weight, still not looking at me, and my sister cried louder, as if my question had wounded her. Dad put a hand on her shoulder, and something in me went cold. He already knew. I saw it then, in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his words were too smooth. This wasn't shock. This was damage control. He started talking about space. About cooling off. About how emotions were high and we didn't want to say things we couldn't take back. The implication was clear, my reaction was the risk here, not their actions. I nodded slowly, because arguing felt pointless, and because a strange calm had started to spread through me, heavy and quiet. I noticed details I'd never paid attention to before, the way my sister peeked through her fingers to gauge the room, the way my husband's hands were clenched like he was bracing for impact, the way Dad positioned himself physically between them and me. A shield. A choice. This was toxic family behavior dressed up as concern, and I was finally seeing it without the fog of hope. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was generational. Dad said it would be best if I took some time away, just for a few days, to let everyone breathe. He said it like he was doing me a favor. My name sounded foreign in his mouth, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I thought about how quickly they'd rearranged my life without asking, how easily they'd decided I was the problem to be managed. The humiliation burned, but underneath it was something sharper, something steadier. I realized I was done explaining myself to people who benefited from my silence. I stopped crying. I stopped shaking. I felt myself pulling inward, gathering pieces instead of spilling them. I agreed. The word surprised all of us. My sister looked up, eyes red, relief flickering across her face before she masked it again. My husband finally turned toward me, hope and guilt warring in his expression, as if my compliance had absolved him of something. Dad nodded once, satisfied, already moving on to logistics. I stood there, listening, committing everything to memory. The lies. The manipulation. The way the narrative was being rewritten before my eyes. This was family drama with a script they'd rehearsed long before I walked in on the truth. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to earn my place in it. I went upstairs to pack a bag, and the house felt like I was trespassing in my own life. In the bedroom, the bed was still unmade, sheets rumpled with evidence no one had bothered to hide. I didn't touch anything. I took photos instead. The habit came instinctively, surprising me with its clarity. Documentation. Proof. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, only that I wouldn't forget. Downstairs, voices murmured, low and urgent, stopping whenever I moved. Secrets thickened the air. When I came back down with my bag, Dad avoided my eyes. My sister whispered thank you, like I'd given her a gift. My husband reached out, then dropped his hand. No one stopped me when I walked out the door. In the car, I sat with the engine off, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding in a way that felt different than panic. This wasn't collapse. This was recalibration. I replayed the scene over and over, each pass revealing something new. The timing of Dad's words. The ease with which they'd aligned. The certainty that this wasn't the first secret kept at my expense. I understood then that taking space wasn't exile. It was vantage point. The quiet one doesn't stop hearing, she starts listening better. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a message from Dad, let's keep this calm. We'll talk when you're ready. I smiled for the first time that night, a small, private thing, because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't calming down. I was waking up. The first few nights felt like exile in slow motion, each place I stayed echoing with the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, only observes. The guest room at my aunt's house was cold and floral, too clean, like grief hadn't been allowed to breathe there. She offered soft smiles and stiffer advice, all laced with undertones of you'll see, it's just stress. Then came the couch at Lena's, where kindness lived but space didn't. I lay curled beneath a borrowed blanket, listening to the hum of her refrigerator and the rhythm of her pity. No matter how far I was from that house, their voices followed me, soft, strategic, rehearsed. My sister texted first. A string of apologies that didn't use the word sorry once. She said she was trying to stay strong and that no one expected it to go this way. I stared at the screen, rereading the passive arrangement of guilt. My husband messaged the next day, writing, "This isn't what it looks like." A sentence so cowardly it almost made me laugh. I didn't reply. That silence became my new weapon, one they hadn't seen me use before. And I realized how uncomfortable they were with not knowing where I stood. Control had shifted, even just slightly. Dad called later that week. His voice was gentle, too gentle. He asked how I was doing, and before I could answer, he started talking about how fragile my sister had been lately. How emotional wounds affect judgment. He used that exact phrase, emotional wounds affect judgment, as if it could justify whatever they'd allowed to bloom behind my back. Then he talked about my husband, called him a good man who made a mistake. But when it came to me, his tone shifted. He asked if I'd been taking my vitamins. If I'd talked to someone. It was subtle, but surgical, the way he reframed me as unstable while coding it in fatherly concern. The emotional abuse wasn't loud. It was polite. Palatable. Easier to digest than the truth. The gaslighting deepened with every call. Conversation started with neutral ground and ended with suggestions I'd been distant for months. That I hadn't seemed happy. That maybe I'd checked out before any of this happened. It wasn't said outright. It didn't have to be. I could hear the story they were building, line by line. My pain rewritten as volatility. Their betrayal recast as unfortunate confusion. A family drama with one antagonist, me. Then came the inconsistencies. My sister told me, in one of her carefully spaced texts, that it just happened once. But later, in a call with Mom, who said she didn't want to take sides, then promptly did, she mentioned months of guilt they'd all been carrying. Months. That single word shifted everything. The timeline cracked. My husband said they hadn't seen each other alone since that night. Yet my shared calendar, still synced on our devices, showed appointments cancelled, weekends unaccounted for. At first, I didn't want to believe it. But when the lies start folding over each other, belief stops being a choice and starts being a scar. I returned to the house briefly one afternoon to gather the rest of my things. My sister wasn't there, but Dad was. He hovered while I packed, trying to sound supportive, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door, as if afraid someone might walk in and make it look like he'd betrayed the wrong daughter. Then he said something that made my spine go cold. "We're just trying to keep things balanced, financially speaking. You know how the house is set up." But I didn't. I froze, bags in hand, heart suddenly racing for a different reason. I asked what he meant. He fumbled, said something about property titles and stability for your sister. That was the first time I realized, this wasn't just emotional betrayal. There were documents. Assets. Things done in rooms I was never invited into. That night, back at Lena's, I stayed up rereading old emails, messages, contracts. I started writing things down. Dates. Comments. Inconsistencies. I cross-checked bank statements, pulled credit reports, and highlighted charges I never made. Uber rides to places I'd never been. Receipts that vanished. Hotel charges under names I didn't recognize until I did. My sister's nickname, one we'd used since childhood, tucked into a transaction description. I took screenshots of everything. I printed them. My hands shook, not from heartbreak, but from the quiet thrill of clarity. I was no longer guessing. I was investigating. The family secrets weren't buried deep. They were just dressed in respectability, in phrases like "we did what we had to and it was for your protection." I started tracing patterns back years, seeing how often I'd been left out of decisions, how often my silence had been convenient. This wasn't one night of betrayal. This was a system. A machine. And I'd been the fuel. The lies weren't just personal. They were financial. Legal. My name had been used where it shouldn't have been. And while I didn't yet know the full extent, I could see the shape of it forming in the shadows. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about truth. And if they wanted to play quiet, respectable games, I could play quietly too. But I wouldn't be respectable. I stopped calling back. Stopped answering texts. Their control depended on my participation. Without it, they flailed. My mother sent a voice note asking me to be graceful in how I handled things, as if my dignity depended on discretion, not justice. She said people were starting to ask questions. I said nothing, because silence says more when it's strategic. Late that night, I sat in Lena's kitchen with my laptop open, documents spread across the table, my eyes burning but sharp. I realized something that chilled me to the core. This betrayal hadn't begun with a kiss, or a night, or even this year. It had roots. Long, deep roots tangled in every childhood dinner, every time I was told to swallow my feelings, every time my sister's mess was swept under my future. I looked at the folder I'd created on my desktop, labeled "Only for later." Inside were names, files, screenshots, bank records. And then I clicked New Document and started writing the version of the story no one else wanted told. That's when the knock came at the door. 3 sharp taps. Not urgent. just expecting. They took my silence as surrender. That was their first mistake. I smiled when expected, nodded when prompted, and let them think I was folding. But inside, everything sharpened. Every breath I took was calculated. Every word I withheld became a blade. They wanted me quiet? Fine. I'd be silent. But this time it would be on my terms. I moved through conversations like a ghost version of myself. My mother asked if I was ready to move forward. I said yes. She smiled like she'd won something, like my obedience still belonged to her. I didn't correct her. She mentioned a church retreat my sister had signed up for to heal, and I blinked slowly, letting the word heal rot in the back of my throat. Dad sent a message about discreet arrangements and how we all needed to protect each other's futures. That phrase clanged in my head for hours. Protect who, exactly? And from what? Outwardly, I returned to their script. I didn't argue. I didn't question. But the truth is, I no longer needed them to admit anything. I had already begun collecting everything they'd left behind, little digital footprints they never thought I'd follow. I started with email. Not theirs, mine. Years of threads, forgotten attachments, shared files, calendar invites. I combed through them with new eyes, pausing at things that once seemed harmless. There was a receipt from 2 years ago, a catering deposit I never made but was tied to my credit card. A forwarded contract that listed me as a guarantor, something I had no memory of signing. My name was everywhere. And I didn't even know where I was. At night, I played conversations in my head like broken records. Things that used to confuse me suddenly clicked. My sister had joked once, just a passing line, about how my husband was better at handling money and how I was too trusting. I remembered the sting I felt, how Dad chuckled and added, "You've always had your head in the clouds." I had laughed then. I didn't laugh now. I found copies of our joint tax filings. Pages upon pages I had signed under time pressure, during dinners, after long days, with them talking over each other, telling me just trust us. I had trusted. And they'd made that trust a weapon. I cross-checked names. Found 2 companies registered under my husband's name, one of which listed a silent partner using a variation of my sister's email. It was all legal. Technically. But morally? It was theft in slow motion, dressed up as family loyalty. I stopped reacting. That was the second shift. I learned the rhythm of their manipulation, how my silence made them more confident, how their arrogance was a gift if I just waited long enough. Every phone call revealed more. My sister mentioned needing to finalize the lease paperwork on a unit I'd never heard of. My husband said he was meeting with Dad's guy for some restructuring. The language was so familiar, so practiced. They thought I didn't understand it. But I did. Now. I booked a legal consultation online. No one knew. Not even Lena. I met with the attorney in a bland office downtown, the kind where secrets were currency. He was methodical. Listened more than he spoke. When I handed him the folder, digital and printed, he raised an eyebrow. "You're not here to ask if it happened," he said. "You're here to ask how to make it matter." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He confirmed what I feared, and hoped. The assets tied to my name were real. The transactions weren't accidents. The property deeds, the credit activity, the shell paperwork, none of it would hold in court as accidental oversight. Especially not with a pattern. And I had patterns. I had timelines. I had proof. The next few days became surgical. I reviewed every shared account. Changed passwords. Set up digital notifications. Froze credit access. Opened a secure cloud folder. I created backups, then backups of the backups. I encrypted files. I learned the language of financial revenge, not the explosive kind, but the slow, bleeding kind. The kind that rots from the inside. The kind that leaves no bruises, only empty accounts and stripped down lies. Meanwhile, my family grew louder. My mother sent inspirational quotes. My sister posted vague captions about growth and faith. My husband left a voicemail where he cried. I listened to it once, then deleted it without a second thought. There was nothing left to say. The house was no longer home. It was a crime scene with fresh paint. But I walked through it again, quietly, when no one was there. I took photos of documents left on the counter. Snapshots of the whiteboard in the home office. A line caught my eye, move before March 3rd, clean up logistics. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I would. I started writing things down, not just facts, but feelings. The moments that used to seem too small to matter. The time my father rolled his eyes when I asked to see the family trust documents. The Christmas where my husband left early and returned smelling like my sister's perfume. The way my mother said, "You'll understand when you have children," whenever I asked why she never held my sister accountable. These weren't memories anymore. They were evidence. Of a system. A pattern. A legacy of emotional abuse and generational trauma passed off as tradition. I stopped trying to fix things. That was the final shift. I didn't want closure. I wanted clarity. I wanted leverage. I wanted control, not conversation. And I was closer to it than they realized. Because they hadn't noticed I was gone, not really. They thought the scapegoat had wandered off, licking her wounds. They didn't see I'd stopped crying and started calculating. Late one night, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line. No body. Just an attachment. I hesitated before opening it, heart thudding against my ribs. It was a scan, my signature, on a deed transfer I never signed. Dated a year ago. Logged by Dad's notary friend. My breath caught. They'd already started replacing me. Quietly. Legally. Strategically. And now I had proof. So the question isn't if I'll burn it all down. The question is, how loud will they scream when the fire finally answers back? There's a specific sound a lie makes when it's printed on official letterhead. It's not loud, not dramatic. Just a soft click of a PDF opening, a quiet betrayal dressed in Helvetica. That was the sound I heard over and over as I sat at the dining table in Lena's apartment, my laptop glowing in the dark, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and documents I'd printed in cold, shaking silence. I followed the paper trail with surgical steadiness, tracing back every hidden choice they made while I was busy being trusting, being patient, being blind. It started with the first property title. The house I lived in, the one I paid half the mortgage on. Only the mortgage wasn't split. My name was on the payment system but not the deed. A clerical error, I'd been told. Something to fix eventually. But the deed had been legally transferred to an LLC. The registered address? A business mailbox linked to my sister. I stared at the screen, hand frozen on the mouse. This wasn't emotional betrayal. This was strategy. Long-term. Premeditated. I found more, shared savings accounts rerouted into investment portfolios I'd never approved, mutual funds liquidated under power of attorney documents that listed my father as a financial steward. Steward. As if he'd been guiding a ship instead of gutting it. I cross-checked every transaction, every signed form. Some of the signatures looked exactly like mine. Too exact. Because they were copied. It was never about a mistake. It was never heat of the moment. They had built a future, together, funded by me. My silence. My labor. My name. And then they planned to erase me from it with the same calm language they'd used my entire life. Stability. Family priorities. Doing what's best. That phrase showed up in an email between my father and a financial advisor, someone I'd never met but apparently had been managing my accounts for over a year. He referred to my assets as reallocatable. I had to look the word up twice to make sure I understood. I did. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. My husband had no financial anxiety because he was never risking anything. My sister, once perpetually broke, had paid off her student loans and was now managing a new lease in a neighborhood that used to be out of reach for all of us. Except now, it wasn't. Because it wasn't out of reach if you were using someone else's foundation to climb. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I printed. I organized. I indexed. I bought color-coded folders and a portable scanner and a fireproof lockbox. Lena didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. Every night I worked in silence, crafting not a reaction, but a plan. I scheduled another meeting with the attorney. This time I brought everything. He flipped through the folders with a slow, deliberate hand. Halfway through the second binder, he looked up and said, "They were building an exit. With you as the bridge." I nodded, but my throat was tight. Even when you know the truth, hearing it confirmed can still draw blood. He explained how power of attorney fraud can be hard to prosecute without clear intent, but with my paper trail? With this many overlaps and misused consents? I had a chance. A real one. Then he said the thing that shifted the entire axis of my revenge: the question isn't if this is enough. The question is when you want to use it. Timing. That was the key. I didn't need a confrontation. I needed precision. A strike clean enough to leave no questions and loud enough to silence every justification they'd rehearsed. So I took the next step. I met with a financial advisor, not the kind my father trusted. A woman. Sharp. Direct. She looked at my accounts like a battlefield map, pointing out every place they'd taken ground. She showed me how to reverse things legally. How to block further access. How to trigger audits without alerting anyone prematurely. She used words like asset recovery and financial distancing. I wrote every one down. I opened new accounts. Set passwords no one could guess. I initiated alerts on every credit activity. Locked down my digital footprint. Moved funds in increments too small to trigger suspicion but enough to matter. I flagged the LLC under my sister's name for investigation, filing an anonymous tip. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was undoing the scaffolding they'd built their lives on. The clarity brought rage, yes. But also something better. Purpose. Control. I wasn't powerless. I was dangerous now, because I was informed. Because I was patient. Because I had evidence. And they still thought I was grieving. The final nail came in the form of a notarized document I pulled from an old filing cabinet I almost didn't check. It was a revised will, Dad's. Dated just a few months prior. It listed my sister as the primary inheritor of the family estate. My name was still there, but it had an asterisk. At the bottom, in small italicized legalese, it read, "Contingent upon mental wellness and demonstrated stability." I read it 3 times before I moved. My hand shook as I folded it carefully into the folder marked inheritance. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a narrative they had written together, one where I was unstable, erratic, fragile. One where my exclusion looked like care. Like protection. They had weaponized my loyalty, painted it as weakness, and planned a future where I was the cautionary tale. The sister who broke. The wife who couldn't handle the pressure. The daughter who lost everything because she couldn't hold it together. But now I held every page. Every signature. Every transaction. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It lived in my hands, thick and heavy, bound in folders and timestamps. Paper doesn't lie. People do. And this paper could end everything they'd built. So I sat on the floor of Lena's apartment, surrounded by color-coded proof, and stared at the final folder, the one marked release. Because I'd already decided I wasn't going to throw it at them in a rage. I was going to let it sit like a shadow behind every conversation, every forced smile, every lie they thought they were still getting away with. And when the moment was right, when they were at their most confident, when the mask was firmly in place, I'd pull the pin. And they would never hear it coming. I returned on a Thursday. No dramatic entrance, no confrontation. Just a message to Dad, I think I'm ready to come home. He responded within 5 minutes. We're proud of you, he wrote, as if my silence had been a tantrum instead of a reckoning. I packed slowly that morning, folding each item as if I didn't already know I wouldn't be staying long. Lena offered to come with me, just in case. I told her no. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a performance. When I walked through the door, my sister was waiting in the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea already steeping. She smiled too wide, her guilt polished into something performative. You look good, she said, and I smiled back with just enough warmth to make her believe me. My husband hovered in the doorway, half hopeful, half wary. He reached for my bag, and I let him. A test. He passed. They all did. That first evening, they said all the right things. How hard it had been. How they'd reflected. How family is complicated. But no one said the word sorry. That silence didn't bother me anymore. In fact, I counted on it. I became gentler. Quieter. My voice stayed low, my eyes stayed soft. I asked how everyone had been sleeping. I baked. I cleaned up after myself. I said thank you more than I meant it. I apologized for being distant, and my mother actually cried. My sister hugged me like we were 17 again, like she hadn't used my name as currency. My father exhaled in relief. I watched the weight of responsibility leave their shoulders as they settled into the version of me they needed to believe existed, the placated daughter, the gracious wife, the understanding sister. They were so quick to believe I'd given up. My husband kissed my forehead the next morning. I kissed him back. He began leaving his phone on the table again. No more secret glances or turned screens. My sister made jokes that dipped too close to the truth, but no one flinched. At dinner, she laughed about that one time we almost ruined everything, and Dad chuckled. My husband rolled his eyes. I smiled, tucked my hair behind my ear, and poured the wine. Every move I made was deliberate. Every silence was loaded. They didn't notice. They were too busy enjoying the return of the version of me they could control. That week, I sat with my father on the patio, watching the garden he pruned obsessively. He told me how proud he was that I'd taken space like an adult. I asked him if the trust would remain untouched. He said, of course. Why would it change? I sipped my drink and nodded, already knowing the signatures that proved otherwise. I didn't correct him. That's not what this phase was for. My sister asked if I'd help her pick out new furniture for her apartment. She said it like a peace offering, like we were rebuilding. I agreed. She let details slip, price ranges, timelines, things that didn't match her job's salary. She said something about our accounts before catching herself. I pretended not to notice. She joked about how I was better with money anyway, and I told her she was being too hard on herself. She laughed, full and relaxed. She had no idea that I already knew about the transfers. That I'd already printed the statements. Even my husband softened. He started suggesting therapy, vacations, fresh starts. He made love to me like nothing had happened, and I let him. Because the performance only works if the actors believe the stage is real. I whispered forgiveness into his ear and watched his shoulders fall in relief. I held his face in my hands and told him, I missed this, while mentally counting down the days. I planted the idea of a dinner gently, like a fragile olive branch. Maybe we should have everyone over, I said one night as we folded laundry. You know, to close the chapter. My husband kissed my temple. My sister squealed with excitement. Dad said it was a great idea. Of course they thought it was mine. They were so eager for peace they never questioned the terms. I set the date for 2 weeks out. Just enough time to confirm the legal filings. Just enough time for the auditor I hired to prepare the official summary. Just enough time to make sure everyone was standing exactly where I needed them to fall. The day of the dinner, I ordered custom place cards. Handwritten. Elegant. I made everyone's favorite dish. I even wore the dress my husband said made me look like the woman he married. I lit candles, played soft music. The illusion was perfect. My mother brought wine, my sister brought a pie, my husband brought a toast. He raised his glass and said, "To moving on." I smiled across the table, watched their eyes glow with relief, and clinked my glass against theirs. Every secret they thought was buried was alive and breathing in the room that night. I had it all. Copies, emails, bank statements, deeds, timelines, signatures. And their laughter around the table didn't irritate me. It comforted me. Because it meant they truly didn't see it coming. The night ended with hugs and leftovers and soft music still humming in the background. My sister left first. Then my parents. My husband kissed me once more before going upstairs. I stayed behind to clean up, humming a tune I didn't recognize but felt familiar. I stood in the center of the dining room, alone now, the dishes cooling and the candles flickering low. Then I opened the drawer. Pulled out the folder I had kept hidden under placemats all evening. Tomorrow, they would learn what forgiveness really costs. They arrived dressed in peace. My mother in pearls, my sister in light blue, soft, innocent tones to match the performance. My husband wore the shirt I'd ironed that morning, as if this were a wedding rehearsal instead of an execution. My father walked in last, shaking off the evening air like he was stepping into his rightful place at the head of a legacy. They hugged me like I was theirs again. I hugged back like it was the last time. The table was set with purpose, 6 seats, white cloth, crystal glasses, folded napkins. At the center sat a silver tray, polished and quiet, the weight of everything they didn't know hiding underneath. The food was warm but untouched. Conversation swirled with false harmony, work updates, real estate tips, half-laughed memories. I smiled, nodded, passed dishes. My sister leaned in to whisper that the apartment was finally coming together, and thanked me again for letting the past stay in the past. I reached across the table, touched her hand, and said, "It's time we talked about the future." Forks paused. Eyes lifted. I stood slowly, walked to the cabinet, and returned with the folder. The tray clinked as I set it down and opened it. "This won't take long," I said. My voice was calm, too calm. That silence after a gunshot that hasn't yet registered. The first paper was a property record. I placed it in front of my father. "The house you told me was in my name alone. It's registered to an LLC, one managed under my sister's business address." His eyes didn't widen, but his hand gripped the edge of the table. "There's more," I continued. "The transfers from my account to fund your stability plans. The power of attorney you filed behind my back. The will you updated without informing me, conditional inheritance. You remember that one, don't you?" My mother gasped, hand to her chest. My father opened his mouth, closed it again. I turned to my husband. "You said it was one mistake. One night." I slid over the timeline. Emails. Hotel receipts. Calendar events. 17 meetings. 4 weekend trips. 3 apartments. 2 joint accounts. And 1 very detailed lease agreement with my sister's signature on it. The air dropped 10 degrees. My sister's face paled. She reached for the document like it might dissolve in her hands. "You misunderstood," she began, but I cut her off. "No. I finally understood. You didn't steal him. You borrowed him, with Dad's approval and Mom's silence. You didn't stumble into this. You built it. With my name, my money, my trust." Tears welled in her eyes. "We were going to tell you. We just needed me out of the way first?" I offered. "Needed me to collapse. Or forgive. But not notice." My husband stood, hands trembling. "We can fix this. Please. We can talk, just us." I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because the panic in his voice tasted like justice. You already had your conversations. This one's mine. My mother asked if this had to be done this way. She glanced toward my father, waiting for him to intervene. But he was already folding. Shoulders slumped, eyes darting across every paper like they were snakes slithering toward his reputation. His power had always come from his certainty. Tonight, I shattered it with documents and silence. I brought a notary, I said. Outside. She's waiting. That sent a fresh wave of panic down the table. There are papers to sign tonight. I'm dissolving the accounts. Revoking the power of attorney. Filing a petition to freeze all shared assets pending review. I met each of their eyes. You won't erase me again. The humiliation shifted. My sister began to sob openly now, not performative, ugly, raw. My husband reached across the table and touched my wrist. Please, I was lost. You didn't talk to me anymore. You were somewhere else, and you found her, I finished. In our bed. With our money. On our timeline. I slid the divorce papers across the table. You can sign them here, or receive them by service. But this is the last meal you'll ever sit at pretending I didn't see what you did. My father stood up. You're burning everything down. Do you even understand what you're doing? I looked at him, long and slow. No. I'm not burning it down. I'm letting the rot speak for itself. Then I pulled the final document from the folder, but didn't open it. I held it in my hand. Thick. Heavy. Ticking like a quiet bomb. My sister stared at it. What is that? She whispered. I smiled. Let's just say, it affects more than just my marriage. And then I stood, leaving them in the wreckage they built, with the unopened envelope resting in my hand like the weight of an entire bloodline's reckoning. I arrived early the next morning. No performance this time. No curated softness or strategic silence. Just me, the envelope, and the weight of everything they thought I'd never say out loud. My father's car was in the driveway. My sister's was crooked on the curb, as always. My soon-to-be ex-husband's SUV blocked the mailbox like he belonged here. Still pretending. I didn't knock. I used the key they'd forgotten I still had. The living room was dim, curtains drawn. They were all there, Dad in his usual chair, Mom perched nervously on the edge of the couch, my sister curled into a ball of shame and mascara, and him, standing, pacing, hands in fists. I stepped in, set the envelope on the coffee table, and sat. The silence didn't break. It bent. You brought it, my sister said, voice brittle, afraid. I nodded. You should all read it together. No one moved at first. Then Dad reached forward, slowly, like the paper might bite. He opened it, unfolded the document, read silently, until the color drained from his face. My mother leaned in, read over his shoulder, gasped. My sister sat up straighter. My husband took a step back. It's already filed, I said. With the state attorney's office. Fraud. Forgery. Property misappropriation. And 2 cases of identity misuse. All backed by notarized evidence and digital records. Your emails, your signatures, your timelines. Dad's mouth opened but no sound came out. My mother grabbed his arm like that would rewind anything. You didn't have to do this, he finally managed. We're family. No, I said, my voice calm, absolute. You stopped being that the moment you chose silence over protection. The moment you watched this happen and helped hide it. You weren't shielding me. You were sidelining me. My sister was already crying. I didn't know about. Don't lie now, I interrupted. Your name's on the paperwork. You filed the LLC. You co-signed the lease. You moved my money into your future. I thought Dad approved it. Exactly. You all thought someone else would carry the blame. My husband stepped forward, desperate now. We can fix this. You made your point. I laughed once, quiet and sharp. This isn't a point. It's a boundary. One none of you will cross again. The silence thickened, clinging to the walls like humidity before a storm. My mother broke first. We didn't realize how far you'd go. You never realized how far you'd gone, I said. You thought because I didn't fight back, I didn't see. Because I didn't speak, I didn't understand. But I've been listening for years. Watching. And now the truth is louder than your excuses. My father stood, tried to rally his voice. You'll ruin us. No, I said, standing too. You ruined yourselves. I'm just letting the light in. He stepped toward me. Not threatening. Pleading. This will follow us forever. Good, I whispered. Maybe it'll keep you from doing it again. He flinched, then sat back down slowly, like the gravity of truth had finally found him. My mother wept silently, mascara streaking down her cheeks. My sister curled in on herself, small and shaking. And my husband, he sank to the floor, head in his hands, finally understanding what losing me really looked like. None of them spoke again. The document sat on the table, plain but powerful. Control had shifted without screaming. Without violence. Just facts. Just truth. And when it finally spoke, it spoke loud enough to silence them all. I left the envelope behind. And this time, I locked the door behind me, not to keep myself out. But to keep them in. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. It echoed with everything I never said, everything they never thought I'd find, everything they lost the moment they underestimated me. In the days that followed, no one called. No one came by. No messages. No threats. Just the heavy, deliberate quiet that always follows when people realize they've been seen for who they really are. I walked through what was left with unflinching eyes. The house, now legally mine again, felt different. Not haunted. Not holy. Just real. Honest in its emptiness. The photos were gone. The shared closet cleared. My sister's perfume no longer haunted the sheets, and my husband's suits were missing from the rack. Good. I didn't want ghosts. I wanted room to breathe. People say revenge is sweet, but this didn't taste like sugar. It tasted like oxygen. Like a lungful of clean air after years of breathing smoke and calling it love. I didn't dance. I didn't drink champagne. I sat on the floor of my own living room, wrapped in a blanket, lights off, and let peace come slowly, like a guest I wasn't sure I could trust yet. The lawyers handled the rest. I didn't need to be in the room. The filings went through. The fraud claims stood. Bank accounts were frozen, statements subpoenaed. Depositions were scheduled. Quietly, privately, efficiently. My name was cleared. My credit restored. My story now backed not just by pain, but by paper. And no one could touch me again without bleeding truth. I received one message, anonymous, but I knew it was my sister. It said, "You really destroyed everything." I didn't reply. Because no, I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd just stopped holding up the walls they were hiding behind. I'd walked away and let gravity do the rest. What remained wasn't vengeance. It was vacancy. The space I had begged them for, all those years. Space to be more than the family scapegoat. More than the wife with the quiet voice. More than the daughter who never made it difficult. Now I was difficult. Now I asked questions. Now I didn't flinch when truth looked me in the eye. I moved the dining table near the window. Let the sun hit the wood where I'd once laid down evidence instead of meals. I opened boxes I hadn't touched in years, journals, college photos, letters I'd written to no one. Somewhere in that mess, I found myself again. Not healed. Not whole. But clear. And that was enough. The question lingered as I made coffee that morning, barefoot, alone, unburdened. Not what did I lose? I knew the answer to that already. I'd lost people who had never really chosen me. I'd lost illusions I'd clung to like safety nets. I'd lost time, yes, but not voice. Not anymore. The real question was something else entirely. When you burn the truth into the ground and watch every lie go up in smoke, what do you build first from the ashes? And maybe, just maybe, what if the answer is yourself? The ending arrives not with screams, but with the finality of doors closed and bridges no longer worth crossing. There are no courtroom outbursts, no dramatic confessions, just the quiet unraveling of a family that fed on silence and called it love. I don't offer forgiveness. I offer facts. I don't ask them to understand. I let them sit with what they did, alone in the ruins they built together. That is the true revenge, not in flames, but in freedom. The marriage dissolves without ceremony. My sister disappears into the corners of her own shame. My parents retreat behind their legacy, now stained with exposure. But me, I step into sovereignty. No longer the scapegoat. No longer the soft-spoken one. I carry no guilt, no apologies. Only clarity. The cost of truth was high. Relationships, illusions, time. But I would pay it again. Because in the aftermath of betrayal, the most radical act isn't revenge. It's refusing to inherit the shame of people who never protected you. It's choosing yourself, even when they won't. Before you go, ask yourself this. What lies have you been protecting with your silence? Because some families only survive as long as you forget who you are. They thought breaking me would keep their secrets safe, but forgetting who I was became the most expensive mistake they ever made.